Hello, and a warm welcome to those attending and also our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee. My name is Councillor John Riley and I'm the chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Please note that members of the committee will be using tablets, laptops and possibly even phones to view the agenda today. We're not expecting a fire drill in any event, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. For those watching via YouTube, if you're so minded, you can complete one of the resident feedback forms, and these can be found in the information section under the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us to improve the way that we run our meetings. All right, I shall now move on to the attendees in this meeting, and if we can all introduce ourselves, we'll start with Councillor Bennett over there.
Councillor Adam Bennett.
Councillor Kaushik Banerjee.
Councillor Farhad Chubadar.
Fiona Sweet, Museums and Heritage Manager.
Carrie Whelan, Corporate Director of Place.
Councillor Raju Sansarpuri.
Councillor Narinda Gog.
Councillor Stuart Mathers.
Anisha Tedji, Democratic Services.
All right, thank you. One of the most important announcements, gentlemen and ladies, if you're wearing them, you may remove your jackets on account of the fact that it is so hot, if you wish to. Okay, so going through the agenda items, apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Gaelic with Councillor Sansapuri substituting.
Very welcome, nice to see you. All right, declarations of interest in matters coming before the meeting, all the usual ones, but don't worry. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was very interesting. Anybody got any comments on these? No? Oh, yes, sir.
In the last meeting, it was suggested that the monitoring module of the Oracle Cloud would be sorted out by May. Have we had any reports that they have achieved that objective?
I've not seen anything.
I'll come back to the committee if that's okay.
Thank you.
And we did say, didn't we, that at each meeting we'd like a finance update in regard to, because that first meeting that we had this year was really good because it had a lot of financial information which we were able to drill down on. And we did say, I think, that we'd we'd like a rolling report on the financial situation so that we could do budget monitoring. And that's not in this set of papers, which is a disappointment, but we'll get Anisha to chase on that as well. Councillor Chibnall.
What's really important to make sure that they've got the tools to deliver on the reports and everything else, because one of the key things which was mentioned was that they deployed Oracle Cloud. Everything was working apart from the monitoring module, and that is really, really important for them to monitor and then report back to us.
Councillor Bennett? Oh, okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. I think it's something that we did emphasise last time and we continue to be concerned about. I mean, we did say that our major going forward desire is to do budget monitoring on a monthly basis, so I'm sure that can be taken back and asked about. All right. Other than that, minutes of the meeting agreed? Agreed. All right, thank you. So, to confirm that items of business marked in Part 1 will be considered in public, yes, and items in Part 2, marked as Part 2, will be in private. I don't think we've got any Part 2, but that's just to make that clear. Right, number 5, maximising council spaces, review of business and private hire opportunities. And this would have been a witness session, but we do have a very interesting scoping report, I think it is, on page 9. And this is, again, to re-emphasise, this is a project that we're very, very keen on, because we have some suspicions around the entirety of the estate that we have, that the council has, in this regard, that we're pretty sure that there are a lot of small buildings, halls, rooms and all that sort of thing that are potentially available for, and I'm going to class it as sort of domestic hire really, as opposed to business hire necessarily. It can include small businesses, but we suspect that there's a lot of these places that we just don't know about. That's the real problem. And not knowing what a council's estate is really rather troubling. Because, as we said previously, having an asset register in this sense has many advantages, not least of which that the buildings or the spaces can be graded. Maybe, I don't know, 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and 1 being the least. And some of them probably have been sitting around for quite some time, not actually doing anything really. And one of the objectives that we were talking about previously was that these buildings, yes, should be graded, but more especially somebody and a point of contact, and realistically 1 officer, or possibly 2, to be in a position to look at these buildings and be able to say to us, well, look, some of these are never going to be used, or almost impossible to use, or it's not economically viable to use them, so we should sell them or do something with that site. On the other hand, this place would do with a lick of paint, and X number of pounds would make the cabinet member for finance's hair curl, but certain amounts of money could be used that would be offset by the hire. And also then, once we know what we've got and we get it into a decent state, we should then really heavily promote it. And I'm sure that a lot of residents and a lot of groups and community groups and all sorts of people would be interested in having the ability to hire from the council. Hillingdon Hire is the name of the company that leaps to mind, or the organisation, or something like that. So that's why we're keen on it. But we're more keen, in one sense, to discover what we've got and be able to point at it and say that we've got these things. And even if it is the case that some of this property goes across different departments. Now, what we're not interested in, so that it cuts the work down a bit, is departments that currently have spaces which they clearly use a lot. So education might have a block of rooms that they use for classrooms or whatever. But what we are interested in, and I'm sure we've all driven past them in our wards, and you sort of think, well, I wonder how often that place is let, or whatever, or what is it even, you know. And I do remember when I was in Cabinet looking after transport, we did the same sort of exercise with car parks, and we found all sorts of little spaces tucked away. And if we are, as we should, being ever more commercial with our properties and our spaces, then at least when we know what we've got, that'll be interesting, and we can tell the various cabinet members to whom this committee is linked about that, and then make propositions for commercialisation. So that's kind of the background. But what it will need is senior officers to appoint somebody, and I don't say externally or additional cost at all. I think that there's probably room for somebody somewhere to be appointed as the coordinator of all this. And once a lot of these things are one-offs, aren't they? Once we've discovered what we've got, and once we've done the audit, and once we've looked at what should happen, then that, to a large extent, that larger piece of work doesn't need to be done again. What it does need is that person to come to this committee and say, right, I've identified I don't know, 20 or 30 or whatever it is, properties. And of those, 5 are really terrible, so we need to sell them, or we ought to do something with them. And the rest we can do up and let. So that's kind of the plan. And fairly swiftly, we'd like to hear about good progress on this, because it has the backing of quite a number of cabinet members, and we just thought it was a jolly good idea anyway. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, members. So I think everything that we've heard since the meeting opened is exactly the sort of approach that we're trying to take at Hillingdon. I think the position that we have with a lot of our, what I would call our hiring type rooms, is we haven't adopted a sort of corporate landlord approach in Hillingdon at the moment. And so what we're trying to do first and foremost is to create the corporate landlord approach for all of our assets across the borough. And so the first piece of work that we are doing at the moment is making sure that we've captured all of our built form. So all of our built form in terms of assets is actually captured on a database that has information relating to those sites. So at the moment we can perhaps look at a GIS system and we can see a building and we know that building exists and we know we own it. The bits that we need a little bit more information about is, well, how are we using it? Who's using it? Is it an operational building, or is it a building that's, we would argue, is surplus to operational requirements? And so this is the work that we are currently doing at the moment, which is to create that asset management database that really understands what assets we have, what we're using them for at the moment, and where we're not using them for operational activity, i.e., so for example, a community centre or a family hub is being used by, say, the adult social care team, for example, or the family team. We know that particular asset is being used for operational purposes, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the work that we're doing in terms of those buildings that are not being used for operational assets at the moment, we are doing a number of things. So firstly, we are looking at those assets as a whole, first and foremost, and saying, are there any alternative uses we should be putting those buildings to? And that might include things like looking at, well, how are we utilising buildings at the moment? So for example, a good example would be the Civic Centre. We have a huge building here. There is opportunity to look at this building in terms of how do we want to use it for the future. Because in the past we've used it for probably predominantly our own personal uses as a local authority. But effectively what we could look at is we could look at how space within this particular building is used, whether or not we're optimising that space in terms of how we're using it, and if we're not optimising that space, can we look to move our services, if you like, into a more confined area to look to see what we can do with other aspects of the civic centre. So you've got that situation, haven't you, where you're looking at assets that may not be used for purely operational use, but you want to understand how you can maximise that space. And we would always look, first and foremost, to probably max the value that we can get from those buildings. So longer term lettings and things like that might be something that we would look at. But there may also be opportunities that we're missing in terms of that space could be used in terms of different rooms. So different rooms might be used for certain hire from certain times during the day. And so that's the kind of activity that I would say at the moment we need to do more work in terms of seeing how we can optimise spaces that can be hired for, say, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and what those uses could be if we were hiring those out. If we then move back to the operational buildings as well, we mustn't forget those, because again, looking at optimising space, are we actually using those operational buildings as efficiently as we could? And if we're not using those spaces operationally that efficiently, then what more can we do with them? And that's when we've been looking, and we've certainly been doing some piloting at the moment with our library areas, where in every library we will have space that you can hire for, say, a couple of hours, or whatever you might want to do with that space, to have a meeting or to have a local event or a sale of goods or whatever it might be. And so the work that Fiona has been doing in terms of looking at how we use space differently is, can we start to maximise how many lets, if you like, we can get from that library space. I think it's really important as well to realise that when we've got operational assets, the way in which those are being managed at the moment is via the departments themselves. So as a result of that activity, we need to have a corporate way of bringing together an understanding of how much money they're actually getting from those lets as they are using them within their departmental brief. And that's where I think we can look to make some changes, whereby we kind of take that corporate landlord approach into that hired space and say, well, we've got X amount of library rooms, we've got X amount of rooms within family hubs, we've got X amount of rooms within, other assets that we own. And what we would do, and it's a bit like, it was interesting hearing the sort of grading system, what we'd look at is we'd look at those rooms and we'd say, well, these are high quality, and therefore we could let those out at this particular level. These are probably more your sort of domestic letting, where somebody might want a meeting locally within their area, and that might come at a different level. And the other thing that we always need to think about as well is the community assets, that we might need to think in terms of, if we've got clubs and if we've got people that are utilising those spaces or want to utilise those spaces, that we might look at as a kind of community style letting approach, rather than everything being in a commercial sphere, if you like. So there is a lot of work to do on hires, because the first piece of work we need to understand is how many of those rooms or spaces do we have across the borough that we know they exist, but what we don't know is where they are. So the work we're wanting to do with our departments, and have started with our departments, is asking them, how many spaces are you utilising your space efficiently? Have you got rooms that you can let out? Are you getting currently income from those rooms, and if so, how much? And I think once we've got that information from every department within the organisation, we can start to assess those people that are doing well and those people that we could probably help them optimise that sort of how they're letting out those properties. So that's the work that we are doing at the moment, but there is a priority at the moment on understanding, first and foremost, the built form assets, making sure we capture all of those, because that, if you like, is the high level leasing, letting values that we can get from those assets by letting them out as a whole. I think the really exciting bit as well is, once we've understood spaces that we can let out, and I think I reported to the last meeting when I was here, a lot of other local authorities have systems whereby you can literally go onto the council website and say, a bit like you've said, Hillingdon hire, or my room booking, and you can go in and say, what kind of room do you want, where do you want it, how long do you want it for, press a button, book it, pay your fee, and it's all booked. A bit like you would book a tennis court or something in a leisure centre. And so that is a concept that I think is we're perfectly capable of getting to that concept. I think we need the work that we would need to do for this committee is to work through that timeline of when that's likely to be.
Oh, I think that's interesting. Obviously, it's not just rooms in one sense. I mean, although rooms probably will be the kind of bread and butter commercialisation, but it's equally identifying buildings that may or may not be savable or want to be saved. I mean, you're right. I mean, I in my own business going around, if I want to hire an office for a few hours or even for a day, some authorities you can just go on their website and, as you say, book it and off you go, and it'll have a desk and internet access and all the rest of that stuff that you need. So there's that sort of side of it, and we are, I think, ridiculously well placed because you've got people coming into town from outside and you've got people coming out of town, and we're bound to be cheaper than let rooms in further into town. I mean, the further in you go, the more expensive it is, and yet you can hire an office here, have your meeting, go and see the general manager or whatever, and zoom in. So that's good. But what team is doing this work you've been talking about? And if we can identify them, can we have them to talk to at the committee?
So in terms of trying to adopt this corporate landlord approach, it is the property services team within the Place Directorate who are leading that work. The work, though, that we are doing in terms of the pilots around hire space was under the Place Directorate, but it's moved more recently to homes and communities. And so Fiona is with me tonight because effectively we've been piloting that area under Fiona's remit to see how we can, if you like, put together an approach that works really well. And if it works really well for, say, areas like libraries, then we get ourselves a proper, approach and process for delivering that, then there's no reason why we couldn't roll that out to other areas. And I don't know if Fiona would like to sort of say some of the work she's been doing.
Yeah, no, yes, of course. I think because... I have.
You have, yeah.
Sorry. Because we're quite established at renting out spaces already across all the heritage sites, obviously the libraries, we were a good team to trial this service because we already do a lot of hires, and that can be all-day hires. It's the commercial type hires we hire out to banks, especially now that a lot of banks are closing. We do a lot of community hires. That will be all the groups, the meetings, supporting a lot of the community work. And also socially, so a lot of parties, weddings across the borough, and we use different spaces for that. And it could be a room in a library that's, while it's open, we hire out of hours. It could be spaces such as the Battle of Britain Bunker, which obviously it's open to the public during the day, but we hire out in the evenings for private functions. So it's utilising all these spaces. We can utilise more, but we are quite experienced already at hiring out these spaces. So over the past year, we've been trialling a service called Bookings Plus. At the minute, it's just through the libraries, but we do want to roll that out to all the heritage sites over the next year. And the way that works, they will provide a 360 video of the space. They provide all the information. There's a pricing structure that when it first started, it was quite restrictive, which is why we couldn't roll it out to the heritage sites straight away, because we have quite a few different pricing structures. But now they can offer different prices or bespoke pricing for each space. And it's proved very successful. People go on, they book the space themselves. There is an element that we do have to approve the space hire. We obviously want to make sure that that people are booking that we're aware of, especially in the spaces where it's out of hours hiring or dry hiring as such. So there is some human involvement in that, in just sort of verifying the purchasing. But the other side of it is that it has taken a lot of work out of the invoicing side, because that's done automatically. So and invoicing is, it can be very time consuming. So you can either just pay with a credit card if you want instant payment, or you can invoice for a number of weeks if you're a group, for example.
All right, great. Councillor Jupiter.
Thank you, Chairman. I start with Fiona, you said the system which you've got is capable of doing invoicing.
Mm-hmm.
Is this system integrated into our main financial system?
I do have the details of this actually. We're paying extra at the minute. It's not integrated at the minute, but it is something we're looking at. We have to pay a commission for this service, and we pay more of a commission because it isn't integrated. But they are working on, we feel we could bring the commission down by not with it working with our own capita system, which it doesn't at the minute, but it is something that we would like to develop.
May I? Yes. So, if I take your answer, is not a system which we manage or owe?
Well, at the minute, our invoicing system, it doesn't work with it as such. The work needs to be done because it's a trial we're going through at the minute. So we pay a fee for them to manage the invoicing for us, but it is something that could come in-house and we wouldn't need to pay that fee. So that's a way we could save money on the commission we pay Bookings Plus going forward. Does that make sense?
No, I'm trying to establish whether it is a piece of, is a system which we manage entirely, which we could then try to integrate into our Oracle Cloud. Or is it a third party which is supplying this service and the system?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is a third party.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carrie, for the background and context, and thank you, Fiona, for providing a bit more colour in terms of what your department does specifically. So I just want to refer to, I think it's page 1 of the scoping report and page 9 of our pack, and just make it really clear that when we talk about the sort of context and the spaces for hire, that are we including, we've discussed this in a previous meeting, I think like garages, we've got like, I can't remember the number, a ridiculous amount of garages that are like, across the borough, and really think laterally in this in terms of like, library car parks are not used on the weekends. I don't know if car boot sales keep happening. Why couldn't somebody just hire it for like a car boot sale? The chair actually mentioned this in previous meetings. There's some like green space near where the chair lives. Somebody could hire that out, and I really want to sort of like think laterally and cast the net wide. So this list of assets literally includes everything under the sun. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, again, we talked about the variety of spaces and potential for hiring from all sorts of organisations. Even things like slightly controversial topic, but things like fairs, and obviously, for example, in Ruislip we have the Duck Pond Market, which is on the Manor Farm estate, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be another type of market on other parts of the green spaces that we've got. And in other areas, and the car park thing is a very good idea. I mean, a lot of our car parks have downtime, as it were, when they're not being used, and could be used for something or other, which would be quite useful. All right, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carrie, Fiona, for coming along and talking to us. I suppose my question is probably more for Carrie. Is what's been the blocker for us doing this before? Because when we talk through this, it seems really, really logical. But for those watching, if anybody is watching on this lovely summer's sunny evening, they would say, well, look, a local authority the size of Hillingdon should have an asset register that has clear transparency of every type of thing that's owned across the borough, what it's used for, who uses it. Has it been systems? Has it been the structure? Has it been the people? And the part 2, I guess, of that is how long do you think it will take? You referenced the timeline to get to that point where we have everything that we would like.
So thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think obviously I've been here about 16 months, and I must admit it is quite unusual for a local authority to not have a digitised database and asset management system. So yes, I think it's fair to say that it is the fact that we lack the systems to enable us to look at things very, very quickly and very, very easily. But not only that, when you've got a system, it actually does quite a lot of work for you. So, for example, if you're letting something out, it will immediately tell you one day, this now has come up for review, rather than somebody having to physically go and check records. So, without a doubt, the work that we have been trying to focus on over the last sort of 8-9 months is to get data that enables us to actually create a proper digitised system where that data goes into that system and we can start working on really optimising the use of our assets much more quickly than we are at the moment. And what if you think about the investment that we put into a system like that, the return on that investment is probably going to be huge, because once you know the level of assets that you need, the depth that you need to know an asset by, particularly when you're looking at things like the hires that you want to do of different rooms and different spaces and so on. When you're going down to that sort of micro level, it's really, really important to have a database that actually helps you manage that. And so, yes, it's fair to say we haven't got that sophisticated a system to be able to address that at the moment, but we have got a project in place through our transformation work that we're doing with Matthew Wallbridge and the great support that we're getting from that team, whereby we are starting to pull together the data that we have to create that database. And I would say, the last position that we were at in terms of our particular work that we're doing, we're looking at about October, when we should be in a position where we'll have a lot more work, we hope, into that system, with all else failing. So that's the current sort of timeline we've got in terms of wanting to bring those systems in place. And as I say, it is based on the fact that in order for that system to work really effectively for us, we need to know our data. And when you're looking at, sometimes paper records, sometimes spreadsheets, that's why we need to bring that together in a much more sophisticated system. And as I say, the transformation team have been absolutely brilliant in terms of trying to scope that work with us and find us the opportunities to get a system that works really effectively for us. But like all systems, there's a lot of digital work going on across the organisation, and so taking that into account, we're looking at about October that we're hoping to have a system in place.
Yep. So just on the system point, have you got the funds that you need for the system? Is that's all kind of earmarked in the budget?
So we have transformation funding within our budget that should be able to support those systems. And in fact, it's one of our, if you like, our corporate priorities within the Place Directorate to have that asset management system in place. And as I say, it's because of what you can achieve as a result of maximising your income from your assets. And most local authorities at the moment are looking to maximise income from assets because, where else is our income coming from? So that when we have those assets, and one of the things I will say about Hillingdon is we are probably rich in assets in terms of what we can use. And so our ability to actually make sure that we convert that into pounds and money, I think is where we need to get to, and we recognise we need to get there really quickly.
All right, Councillor Clark.
So I've got a few questions. It says you've got a targeted income of 40k for this year. I can see on page on page 11, there's a number of things that you're taking into consideration there. As well as the system, has that taken into, from what you're saying, it sounds like you could just go online and book something. What about the vetting and the risk? I know it says risk assessment, but in terms of how are you going to, have you got the infrastructure, security, parking spaces, all of that sort of thing? Have you got that already invested in this project? Because I can foresee there being certain things there. That was the first question. And the second question is around the sponsorship opportunities. How are you going to ensure that the sponsorship opportunities that you take on, because it's almost like saying Hillingdon Council is sponsored by these people, so you're sort of saying, oh, for example, I don't know, it could be a car hire company, you're saying that Hillingdon Council endorses this hire company. So just around those few things.
So shall I start in terms of the infrastructure, and then Fiona will probably come in with how she's been operating that in terms of, say, the library pilot that we're doing. But I think in terms of infrastructure, I mean, when we're looking at any of our assets, we would look to hire them out, making sure that we can, if you like, hire them out for the uses that people are suggesting. So, for example, if you did have, if you say you hired out some space for a nursery, for example, from a planning perspective, that would need car parking to be able to effectively hire it out that way. So whenever we're looking at uses on any of our sites, whether they be a whole asset or whether they be part of an asset, one of the things that we would carry out is some activity around the valuing of that and the uses that we could use those sites for. So that's part of the process of analysing what it is you can use our particular assets for. And again, why we would say the database is so important in that, because what we can also then connect it to is our planning, local plan uses of making sure effectively we've got buildings that we know what use they can be used for, or whether they can be used for alternative uses. So whenever we're renting anything out, it has to be fit for its purpose effectively. And so if we were letting out sort of a room that didn't have parking and, you know, perhaps 100 people were attending, then we'd look to find a site where we could accommodate that parking, rather than saying, yes, you can have that and bring 100 sort of cars, if you like, into residential spacing, for example. So that's what we do on the infrastructure side, make sure we are letting spaces for the right purposes, and also that they're compliant purposes as well in terms of planning and so on.
So what I was trying to get to was, with all that analysis, there's a cost that's attached to doing that analysis.
Yeah.
Has that been factored in? And then you said, okay, this is going to cost us maybe 30k to do all of this, and we've got to get an income of 40k, so it's 30 plus the 40.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to get to, have you financially modelled around that?
So a lot of the work that we're doing, and I think garages is a really good example, for example, so the work that we are doing on garages is looking at those garage sites and recognising that some of those are not lettable at the moment. And the reason they're not lettable is because they are in a need of repair. So the work that we would do is we'd look to establish how much it's going to cost to repair those sites and how much income we could then make from those sites once they're repaired. And what that gives us is, if you like, the sort of the cost-benefit analysis of doing it. And once we've got that cost-benefit analysis, that enables us to make an informed decision as to whether it's worth doing that, or whether it may be better, for example, on a block of garages to say, well, it's not cost effective because they're in such a poor condition, and therefore what we might do with that site is we might look to either dispose of that site for development or look to redevelop it ourselves. So those are the kind of cost-benefit sort of analysis we're doing and business cases we do when we look at assets across the board in Hillingdon. But I think when you're looking at the sort of hired spaces side, that's where Fiona's been doing this work too. She's got a raft of different hired sort of spaces she can look at, and what she will do is look at those hires that are being requested and say, this is the better site for you, or this is the better site for you.
Yeah. If I can just add to what Carrie's saying, we do have a vetting process. So you can make an inquiry, and there has to be an approval and an admin process before you can actually book the space. So it's not completely automatic. And then, along with all the spaces that we currently have, as I said, it's just currently with all the library rooms, but you can hire out the whole library, for example, in a couple of the spaces. And we have been doing a lot of stats around that. We're just coming up to the first year, and at the next meeting, Darren Deeks will come with the full range of statistics to say how we've increased bookings over that year period, etc. And it also includes some more commercial bookings within that as well. And within that as well, just to answer another part of your question, we include all the services that you can have within those spaces, whether it's IT services, parking, what have you. So we give as much information as we can, but there is still that human element involved because we don't, we do have an admin approval process.
I think there was another question.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we? Councillor Chibnall first, then Councillor Mathers. Oh, hang on. Oh, you had another question? Oh, okay, go on then.
Yes, so, Chair, we just discussed the sort of infrastructure side. I think there was another question around our sponsorship opportunities and how we were looking to manage those. So one of the things that you're probably aware of is that this year we launched the Open for Business concept, which was under our economic growth initiatives and our economic development opportunities. We have announced that Hillingdon is open for business, and part of that work ranges from being able to look to work with developers to perhaps develop large areas of our sites, but it also goes down to if you want space to let or to hire or to work with us, how would you like to work with us? And some of the areas that we've been looking at in a lot more detail, we've been able to increase our sponsorship this year quite considerably, and that's enabled us to, I think we've got a target this year of about 230k of additional sponsorship money, and we're doing quite well against that. We've not quite got to the 230k yet, but we're not far off. And again, there's more work to do in there, but what we're seeing is we're able to find sponsors that want to work with us and sponsor certain events. So good example recently was the picnic in the park. That was totally sponsored by Heathrow. And so no cost to the council whatsoever. They paid for all of that. But what's more, because they really, really enjoyed that ability to be able to meet the community in that sort of face-to-face approach, they have come back to us now saying we would like to sponsor it for the next year. So again, we've kind of, and I think there's a lot of companies out there that we can work with. What we also have been doing is really pushing our social value on some of our contracts. So for example, a lot of our contractors that we work with where we have big, contracts with them, our highways contracts and so on, the social value that's coming back from that is sponsoring some of our activities within either the civic centre or Christmas or whatever it might be. And so we're starting to utilise those opportunities of working with businesses. And effectively what we're doing with that, so every time we can use businesses either for activities that we do or events that we do, or they'll pay for sponsoring events, one of the things we're doing with that is we're keeping wealth within Hillingdon. And so people are paying money and the wealth is staying within Hillingdon. And that's the kind of thing we want to do in terms of building the local economy. So that's the real those are the real benefits that come out from that local economy, local economic growth relationship with people. And the other sort of two ideas that we're looking at the moment is what we call creator space or maker space. So for example, if you've got some sites, it might be shops, it might be things that we're not able to utilise, we're finding we can't actually work them under their current uses. There's a lot of opportunity where creative people want to work together in a space, but they might only want it for a certain period of time. And so creating these spaces where like-minded people can come together and work together You know, those are the kind of things that are, again, really pushing the local businesses and the local, if you like, micro-business economy. And then the other area that we are looking at as well is when we're doing developments of sites, for example, we can look at what we call meanwhile space. So you might have some sites that whilst you're waiting to develop a particular development site, these sites may be empty. You can let those out for, you know, a sum of money on a meanwhile basis, and you're getting rental in whilst you're waiting perhaps to demolish or redevelop that particular site. So again, these are the kinds of examples, I think, that would be really good to build into this scope that we're talking about here in terms of how we could start to really move that type of activity forward and think more creatively about how we use space.
All right, okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jibber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Carrie. Actually, I start from the last thing you just said, whilst it's still fresh in my mind, is the idea that we've coming up, and you both have come up with a number of items and things which you are doing, which are really interesting and positive. Now, the key thing I want to know is, have we documented all these things? Is there somewhere I could go and look and see the plan, the master plan? Or are we just coming up with ideas at the moment and they haven't been put into a master plan under which we will achieve an objective?
So in terms of the documentation that we have, we know that we've built into our budgets the requirement to increase our lettings and the money coming from our lettings over this year. So I know the report says it's looking at 40k. I think the 40k item that's been put in this report is purely in relation to the work that Fiona is doing on this pilot. In addition to that, we're probably looking at, I would imagine, about 800, I think it's about 867,000 more income that we're trying to bring in 25-26 through optimising things like the garages, optimising our leases, making sure all our rent reviews, for example, are up to date and that we've recovered that income. And also, dare I say, one of the other aspects of this as well that's really, really important is we can let out space, but we have to manage all of that letting and the money that's coming in against that space very, very proactively. So, for example, we don't want to have a situation where we're letting out space and then later on we find that we've got debt that we need to recover. So the whole sort of scope of how we're dealing with things has to make sure that it includes debt recovery, all of those kind of aspects that come with letting premises. And so the work that we have done so far is to start working on how we build that extra 867k this year. And the areas that we've concentrated on to obviously maximise that as quickly as possible is in terms of getting our current leases up to date and making sure that those are up to date in terms of rent reviews and the money that's coming in, that we're making good use of our garage lettings. So a lot of that income we've said we will put towards garages to make sure that we can increase the income on those garages. And the other aspects of it is any other sort of licenses, rights of way, all of those kind of things that we are currently probably not optimising the value from. And so the next area of work is where we're then starting to look at what we would class as part of the fees and charges work and how we build income generation for the organisation. And that's where the hired sort of space comes into that sort of space in terms of the financial modelling. So I think it's really important that when we're looking at hiring spaces, you're probably looking more in that fees and charges income generation activity rather than what I would say is maximising use of our assets, which is more the larger leasing, letting, disposing activity that goes on to create the really big money that you're trying to find.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you in 1 second.
I need to-
Councillor Mather's been waiting for a long time. Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Chair. 800,000, 900,000 is a lot of money to find, and I'm pleased that work's been done in advance of this review, really. I wouldn't want the review to be holding up the work that's in train in order to make sure the budget is achieved, and I think systems and things will make the estimates of the next budget more robust. So I congratulate you on starting that work, because I think if we, unfortunately, we could have been a bit chicken and egg with this, and then there's that lots of income. I guess my thinking isn't so much on the maximisation of the assets that we have. We have officers now who have got their eye on the right systems that will provide the right support in order to enable that. For me, it's around recognising that the council isn't just a corporate body or a commercial unit, but actually a community enabler. The council is a public service. It's a space in which residents see their communities enhanced, and not just every community asset is for hire. There's been some things that have reassured me in the conversation, particularly the community landlord relationship. I have a few questions around kind of your thoughts, within your directorate, and obviously the model that you've done within museums and heritage as well, around kind of what protections are in place around that, because it's extremely, when there's such a high target to reach, it's extremely easy to forget the value that these assets can add to the community. So, for example, with leases, if we maximise a lease that a community centre has, which is a voluntary run group in a local space, run by volunteers, that if we paid staff to do that, it will cost a fortune, and providing hired spaces at an affordable rate to the community. If we maximise that rent to almost commercial rates, I'm not saying you would, we lose the community fabric. And so I guess it's how do we stay in that mindset of supporting that. But also, part of my sadness in this is that I do agree with Councillor Bennett that there must have been barriers to have done this in the past, and some community assets that were at risk, and some that currently are, like the Rural Garden Centre, had they have had this approach, they could be, and I'm not going to preempt a cabinet decision, but they could be at a place where, okay, there was an adult social care element to that, but more so that they were in a place where they were more commercially viable, and therefore that space was kept for the community, because once we lose spaces, we can't get them back. So, and there's other small examples, like the picnic in the park was a successful event. It was great to see probably many faces around this room. It was sponsored by one of our local employers. But within that, there was the small football area where we had all the kind of local stall holders who were people selling sweets and Father's Day bits. I nearly bought myself some really nice sweets, and other bits. But they were put to the side at the back inside the multi-sports area. Great if it would, well, it did rain, but great because it's a hard surface, but they're not part of the general footfall. So when we are commercialising those events through sponsorship, we also think about how we defend and stick up for those kind of individuals who are going to be the people that pay their, I don't know how much it was, let's say £20, £30, but they're there at every event, and they create that sense of local by their very presence. So it'd be really useful to find, sorry for the long-winded question, but to get an understanding kind of what your 5 protections are almost, of keeping us community-minded in a commercialisation, maximisation kind of approach.
So I think we have to recognise that every local authority is not like a commercial company. And I think, I think we always need to recognise that we provide a community service. And so part of the activity that I think always comes with local authorities is how do we support local communities to be able to use those assets in a way which they can afford. Now, the way that I've done that in the past is to look at the ability to pay in terms of those community groups. You should always value an asset, so you should always understand the value of that asset when you're looking at it, you know, in terms of its just what it can achieve. But there's always that situation, isn't there, where you sit there and say, but we've also got a community requirement as well as a local authority. And if there is a genuine concern about the ability for those community groups to be able to pay, then we should, as a local authority, be looking at that ability to pay process, and therefore protecting them in terms of that ability by looking at things like, well, if you're only going to use a particular site for this use, then we can restrict the sort of what we call the user clauses within those lettings, and by restricting those user clauses we can keep the rents down to a reasonable level that our local communities can actually afford. So there is, so for example, say you've got a scout hut, for example, and you're letting, they want to look at sort of letting a particular space. If from a valuation point of view, you would value that particular asset in terms of its use as a scout hut. And because it is for that recreational, community-style use, anyone coming in and valuing that would say, well, it's only worth X amount. But if say the scout hut decides, well, actually, there's somebody coming along and they want to run a commercial nursery there because they can run it during the day, and actually we can use the scout hut in the evenings, for example. That's where the user clause would change, because suddenly that scout hut becomes effectively a commercial entity, and we would need to look at reviewing how we review that sort of user clause in relation to what they're doing on that site. So I think those true community uses where you want to protect things like your community centres, where you want to protect things like your scout huts and your brownies and those kind of places, you set the rent according to the use that they're going to put that site to. And by doing that, you can keep those rents at a low level. And I think, as I say, we're lucky in Hillingdon in that we're quite rich in assets. And so there should be that blend, shouldn't there, of being able to find assets where we need to really maximise the commercial side of those assets against those which we say they're in a park, they're in a community, they're being used for a really good use for that community, and therefore we would start looking at setting those rent levels at affordable levels for themselves. And in some cases, sometimes those rents are just a peppercorn or whatever they might be. So those are the kind of ways we would assist our community to make sure we've got a really good blend of community uses, business, commercial uses. And that's how we help them, by restricting the uses that they can put to those sites.
All right, thank you. Councillor Sansapuri.
Yeah. And suppose we have some building, a community-owned building or a council-owned building, and it is not fit for the purpose, and it is not fit for the purpose at the moment, and need some improvement. Can we use 105 money for that purpose? Can we use 105 money? I think. Sorry, 106. Sorry, 106. Yeah.
With all of our assets across our portfolio, the council sets within its budget a repairs budget that helps us manage those repairs. So we tend to assess our corporate assets in one way, and then we also assess our housing assets, if you like, in another way. And bear in mind, when we've got housing assets, for example, they'll be how we pay for those will be through the council's housing revenue account as opposed to the general fund requirements. And for our more corporate assets, those will be ones that will be repaired under the council's general fund in terms of those assets. So throughout our requirement is to make sure that we can keep those buildings in a safe state of repair effectively so that we can let them out. But equally, we've also got to look at those sites that we may not be letting out at the moment, because there will still be a duty to look at the state of repair of those to try and keep that value maintained whilst we look to find alternative uses. In terms of whether or not we can use Section 106 money, I guess, we can use Section 106 money for any kind of activity that Section 106 agreement allows us to use it for. So that's the first thing with that money. But I guess the situation would be, would we need to use that money in the first place if we can actually use our own sort of built-in budgets to manage our repairs?
I think our hope is that all of these things are at least self-financing, if not making some money. And that, I take Councillor Moses' point, but actually before you can be quite as community aware, you do need to have the assets working for you in order to be able to maybe have a graduated letting scale or something like that. So, but I'll let Councillor Banerjee and Councillor Jevada go first, and then we'll have some further comments.
Thank you, Chair. So something or a phrase that's been used quite a lot in your scoping report is a corporate landlord. And just thinking about that and putting, maybe a landlord cap on, that comes with its own costs. One thing just off the top of my head is going to be insurance, maintaining these, let's call them units for want of a better description, repairs, maintenance. If something goes wrong, we're going to have to be called out to, fix the issue. And then thinking ahead, again, something you've already said this evening, do we have the skills to manage these tenancy agreements and these tenancies? Do we have the skills in-house to manage the debt collection? And inadvertently, get to the Chair's point and Councillor Mather's point to some extent as well, we don't want to make these into a lost leader. There's no point getting in, let's say, that 800k when we have to spend $1 million to do that, because we're under huge budgetary pressures as a council. And I don't know if this can be done by asset class. Talk about garages a lot in this committee for some reason. It's really struck a chord with me. Can we see, to maintain garages? Is that, worth it in the long run? We can't lose sight of this. I think it's, quite important. Thank you, Chair.
Shall I pick that one up? So, in terms of maintenance and repairs and the skills to manage everything, we do have a very skilled corporate repairs team. And in actual fact, what we've been doing over the last sort of year, 14, 15 months, is bringing both our housing repairs team and our corporate repairs team together so that we can actually also use framework agreements for some of our repairs. So, for example, if we know through our housing repairs that we need windows, we need boilers, we need things like that. Because we have frameworks for that, we can also use those frameworks to help us with the corporate repair responsibilities as well now. So we have that flexibility to be able to use and try and get the best sort of prices obtainable in terms of repairing our stock. In terms of sort of insurance costs, and yes, we have to have those. There might be sites that we might say it's not worth insuring them, and so we might self-insure, and that's another way of trying to keep those insurance costs down. But equally, some of the work that we've been doing recently, for example, is looking at debt levels. And just over the last sort of 5 weeks, I think we've brought in about another £240,000 worth of debt just by making sure that we go out there and proactively chase it. So, you know, these are the kind of sort of activities that, in terms of the asset management approach that we now need to take in Hillingdon, it has to be a lot more proactive than perhaps we've been doing in the past. And maybe that's more because we know that for all local authorities across the country, you know, things are getting more difficult in terms of being able to find funding for our major statutory services. So this is where it starts to put the real pressure on making sure that we can deliver returns from activity and you know, assets that we can make money out of. So those are the sort of things that I think we would do. And the other thing I think I mentioned earlier is, whenever we look at an asset, whenever we look at what we want to do with that asset, there will be a business case attached to it in terms of the return on investment. So if that return on investment is not going to give us a good enough yield, then the answer will probably be we won't be doing it. So, you know, every sort of activity we do around lettings, leasing, whether we develop it or whether we say it's surplus to requirements and we dispose of it, you know, all those options are available to us, but every single one has to have a business case that shows we're getting best value.
I would just add to that as well, one of the features of the Booking Plus system is that you pay in advance. We don't have to do that debt collection. So that is one of the problems we have at the moment, that we are constantly chasing debt, but that, you know, you don't hire the space unless you've paid the month in advance. So.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. So this question was sort of builds on that one quite nicely. It's more for Fiona, based on your experience in the year of doing this. So with another hat on, I'm a trustee of a charity in Uxbridge. We have a community hall and we try and hire it out with varying degrees of success. But there's a lot of admin that goes with it. So my question is, based on your kind of year of trial of this, are the margins there? Because you could have a room or a space and you hire it out, and on the day the caretaker or the key holder's not well, or we've got to get somebody else to come in as a backup, or the user leaves the room in a mess, there's damage, or it requires cleaning, or they don't turn up at all and then they want a refund, or there's all of those things that, to be honest, I never thought would be that problematic until you get into the run of it. And actually where we've got to as a charity is sort of saying we're probably going to cut back on the paid for stuff because you barely break even, and is it worth the hassle to do everything on top? So I'm hoping you're going to say it is, and we should be doing this.
I mean, in terms of the trial that we've been doing with Booking Plus, there are going to be a lot more stats coming at your next meeting, the next meeting, which the libraries team will bring. So it's probably best for them to report properly on that. What I would say, I mean, as you know, I do rent out a lot of spaces across the borough, and a lot of them are spaces where I have we've put key safes on the side of the building to try and get rid of that admin. So we've done a lot of things already to try and bring down that admin time, because there was a point where I'd be opening, closing buildings constantly. It's just not a good use of my time. So we have put that in place, and we have, I mean, just using Eastcote Garden Stables as an example, I mean, that is a great example of somewhere where we've really increased the rental income on that space. We are very hands-off. So there's a key safe. I ask the hirers to ensure they clean up after them. I give them really strict instructions of how they should leave the building. We do have cleaners in, but only twice a week. I've never had a problem. So this is just one example, but I think it can be a success, and I think we can definitely utilise more buildings and be more hands-off in terms of the admin. What I would say, and this is just sort of answering your question actually from earlier, is that we do really concentrate on the whole community side of things. We're very much, we rent out to the community quite extensively, and we have fees and charges to match that. So we'll have the community rate, we'll have the social rate, we have a Hillingdon rate and a non-Hillingdon. So if you fall into the community Hillingdon, you do have a very affordable and cheap space that you can hire. So we do sort of look at those types of groups and try and attract them especially. All
right, thank you. Councillor Gibler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions and I want to put them to you together. You came up with a lot of fantastic ideas earlier in response to my question, and I want to follow up on that and ask you, all those fantastic ideas, have they been put into a project plan? And if so, are we monitoring progress on them? And if they haven't been put into a project plan, could they be put into a project plan so that we could monitor progress of with all the ideas you have come up with? Secondly, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the GIS system, and you also mentioned that from the GIS system, you can ascertain all our assets. Okay? So, essentially, it looks like to me that we do have a baseline. We do know where all our assets are, and my understanding of GIS system is that attached to the geographical information system, the backend is a database which gives you all the information about these assets which we've got. So it looks like to me that we do have a baseline. It's just a case of going and getting it out of the databases they are and putting it in a format which will be more robust and practical to what we are trying to achieve. So the second question was, you really answered by nodding and saying that we do have we do have all the information in the GIS system. Is that correct?
Shall I answer that one first for you, and then I'll come back to the other one? So look, the problem that we have with the GIS system is what it's been used for in Hillingdon over the past years is to just show our land holdings, what we own. You're right in that GIS systems can have attached to them a separate database, which is in what we call an estate management system, whereby if you then click on to that particular icon of a site, it will go through into another system and it will tell you this is being let out, this is being not let out, this is being used by whatever. The part of the GIS system that we have is the assets were put onto that system a good few years ago, and it was never kept up to date. So whenever we use that as a base at the moment to understand what, so for example, you might look and say it looks like we own that, but we still have to then go and check, unfortunately, because that system hasn't been kept up to date, as to whether we may have sold it in any of the years since it's not been updated. So that's why we are taking the view that we need to get a new system, but not only that, a system that will have a kind of gazetteer, it will have a kind of mapping system attached to it, but it will have that extra add-on which enables us to know what we're doing with those properties, so that we're just not got a red line round an area to say the council owns this site. So that is the problem that we've got with the GIS. It's merely only plotting the land holdings that we own from say your own property at home. When you've got your deeds, it will show on the land registry a line saying you own this amount. Well, that's what our GIS is doing for us at the moment. It is just telling us from our deeds it looks like we own this particular piece of land. But again, as I say, we've sold it because we have done a lot of disposals of sites over the last few years. It won't necessarily tell us that we've sold that site because it just hasn't been kept up to date. So in terms of the projects and the fantastic ideas, you're absolutely right, and we are looking, as I say, as part of this activity this year to try and find £867,000 worth of money, additional money that is, and that means we've still got to retain the money that we're currently getting. We are working at different ideas to try and see how we deliver that. So, for example, we have got a process we're looking at the moment, which is looking at garage sites. The other piece of work that we're doing, particularly, and again, what we're trying to do is link this to other activity within the council that that is also useful to us as well around income generation. So, for example, we're currently looking at our parking strategies, and as part of those parking strategies, for example, we're looking at the usage of car parks. And so if we've got any car parks that we own, that we are perhaps not getting the usage that we would expect to get for the land that we are using, then again we'd look to see what we could do with the land that's not being used for parking. So still maintaining that parking, still trying to maintain the level of income that comes from that parking. But if you've got, from our usage, showing that something is only perhaps 12 to 20% used at any one time, and even at peak times, then what that's telling you is that car park has some space there that could be used for alternative uses. So that's the kind of work that we're doing. Those ideas, we haven't got everyone mapped at the moment in terms of what we will do to deliver that. What we're trying to do at the moment is take a set of projects and say, how do we start moving that set of projects forward? So let's start with garages, let's start with parking and car parks, let's link that to fees and charges, and have a more sort of connected way of dealing with stuff. But yeah, the ideas are on a list, but we haven't got a project plan to bring them all in at the moment.
Okay, and will we be able to see the development and progress of all of this?
Yes.
And again, I go back to one of my earlier questions. I think you said that corporate property team were dealing with some of it. And of course we've got libraries as well. I'm still concerned that there's far too many disparate departments involved, and we need to bring it together. And for our purposes, ideally, we want a single point of contact who's able to say, when we ask the question, right, this is where we are on garages, this is where we are on rooms, this is where we are. And the more I've thought about it, the more I think that it probably Fiona may not like this, vests better in libraries because you've already got the experience, and but also it's twinned with an ability to promote and look at much more vigorous promotion of the asset base. But despite all of this, we still don't have, do we, a go and look at and point at register that tells us what we've got. No, we don't. All right, that's very helpful. Okay, Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. I'm a little alarmed about the lack of sustainability of the GIS system previously. So the new question that came into mind on top of the quick one I mentioned in a moment is a bit like what the Chair has said, the sustainability of these things going forward, not just in the kind of single point of contact, but your systems are only as good as the data that they have. And, under your leadership, there may be a real focus on whatever system it is being kept, but how is that sustained? I'm hoping that's not kind of, what's the word? Well, anyway, thank you. But is something that's just mindful that there is legacy to this work. Otherwise, we'll be sat here in 5 years' time having the same conversations, which would be quite daunting. My one question that I wanted to originally ask was around community voice. So obviously, it's really important that residents have their say in how assets are managed. They may have their own ideas about how they can be commercially more viable. They will have their ideas about what a space could be used for differently that we've not imagined. And it's obviously community voice takes time. There's a target to reach, and time may not be on our side. So it's just how that's going to be built into the process, and what contingency there might be to allow a bit more time to have community voice, which may mean that the target changes in some way without just asset disposal, if that makes sense. Not on the individual decision, but just generally as a contingency to meet the target. If we don't meet it, let's not just sell stuff off. Let's actually take time to consider views and stay to this path, if that makes sense.
If I talk about the GIS system first, I mean, the one reason why I would say that at this point in time, with the approach that we're wanting to take, and bear in mind the work that we're wanting to do here, even if the current GIS system that we have here was up to date, it wouldn't have the sophistication or the ability to be able to do some of the work that we're talking about doing here. So, in my mind, it doesn't really make sense to look to try and fix that system. The sense has to be on moving forward with new, more modern ways of delivering your asset management data activity. And so, if we're going to go down that route, and I think we need to, because we're so much more reliant on, income from assets and using our assets wisely, I think it's really important that we go to get the system that works for us and is more up to date, so that we can make it more flexible and usable for us. So I think that's the first part on that. I would say, I understand where you're coming from in terms of why it hasn't been kept up to date. I think in terms of where we are as Hillingdon, in terms of wanting to move forward and use our assets wisely, I think it would be quicker and easier to bring in a newer system with everything attached to it, so that we can manage it more effectively. So that would be my approach on that one.
Just for clarification,
yeah.
I agree with that approach entirely. It was more with the next system, how do we make sure we learn from the mistakes that we didn't maintain the last system?
So I think the sophistication that you've got in asset management systems now, they are so much more user-friendly and easy to use that you will want to keep those up to date, because it will make your activity, if you like, so much easier to deliver. So because the job starts to become a lot easier to deliver, you'll look after it. And not only that, a lot of the activity will be linked to things like payment of invoices. It'll be linked to debt collection. It'll be linked to income generation. So we would like to get systems that are linked to our Oracle system, so that the whole thing's connected up. And again, what that does is speed up processes. And I think we can all agree one of the things that we all want to do in Hillingdon is speed up processes for our community. So I think the newer systems people will want to use, because they're so much easier to use and so less clunky than some of the older systems that we're still trying to maintain and monitor. In terms of the community voice and how assets are managed, the one thing that we now have, as all local authorities, is the ability for members of the community to look at any assets that may come up and say, could they become community assets? And so there is that opportunity in law now, and so because of that, there is a process in place whereby people can look at our sort of assets and look at how that is dealt with in a sort of legal and statutory sense. So I think, in terms of that community voice aspect, they are actually protected now by a system that helps them get to that stage in law. I think in terms of how we look at asset utilisation, bear in mind our budgets are built on the need to find capital receipts, the need to find a certain level of income, and so all of those assets should be used to try and generate that level of income that really helps support the statutory services that we need to provide to our residents. And bear in mind as well, in a place like Hillingdon, we also have residents that love all the discretionary services that we deliver as well. And we're all sort of people that live in communities where we want them to look nice and we want to enjoy them. So I think first and foremost there is that requirement for us to look to make sure that we do get best value out of our assets. But as I say, I think as I said before, if we can do that in a way that makes sure that the vast majority of those assets that are worth considerable amount for us to generate that level of income or to generate that level of return, then there should be enough of the other sort of assets that we can use to support our local community. And I think it's about getting that balance right in terms of, again, the systems will help us with that, what are the assets that we would say are more sort of for community uses within the borough, and what are the assets where we would say we would look to make a more of a commercial return on those assets in order to protect our finances, like any good commercial person would do if they're looking at a sort of commercial return.
All right, thank you. One last quick question from Councillor Tudor.
Chairman, through you actually. The thinking here is, and based on everything which is being put forward, points me to the direction that actually until such a time we have a baseline of all our assets, okay, the second stage and the third stage and the fourth stage doesn't come into play. So I guess one of the key things I would like to suggest is make the establishment of a baseline of everything which we have a priority in this project. If other things could be planned and run parallel to that, fantastic. If not, until we know what we've got, we don't know what we're going to do with it.
I think that's, to a large extent, what we've been saying. What we need to do, and Councillor Jibbar's right, what we need to do is to really, and it's not like we haven't said, this committee hasn't said this before, we need to have in place, very quickly, an ability, whether it's done by ward or what, I don't know, but we need to have this capacity and ability to know what we've got so that we know what we're going to do with it. And it may very well be that certain of our assets, whether they're garages or buildings or collections of rooms, are very easily looked at and decided that we A, don't need them, B, it would be uncommercial to sort them out and all the rest of it, and can start getting some money. Because one of the things I was a little bit interested in, well, a lot of it interested in everything you said, but more that came out earlier was, supporting our statutory services. No, in my mind, that is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is give added value, because we already have the duty to do the statutory services. And we have some money, not much, but some, that goes towards that. This council has always been in the forefront of giving added value and different things and interesting things to our residents. So the idea of commercialising and better using, whether it's community commercial or whether it's true commercial, out of these assets, which probably, as we suspect, in many ways are not working, is to be able to then provide our residents with the added value. Because if you just keep feeding one area, and to a large extent it doesn't get so much better because it does need so much, then you're never going to get back to a situation where you can provide added value, like Hillingdon in Bloom, like baskets, like all sorts of things that people miss, and they really do bring up with us, and they get it when it's difficult and there's problems in the finances and all the rest of it. But if we can make these things work and generate some funds which can then let us do added value type things, and that's the aim. All right, look, next time, will you be able to put someone forward who's sort of leading on this? I mean, I know Fiona's doing her bit, and I do really think that this could end up in her department because they've already got the experience. But will you be able to identify an officer who's got the kind of reach across the departments to be able to sort of start drawing this together? I think that's a real aim, really.
So Chairman, I think we're at that situation where it's unfortunate that Gary Pentecost couldn't make it this evening, and he did send his apologies and the reason why. But the Place Directorate will be leading this area of work. I do stay with it because there is a there is a link through to me in terms of the property side of the business for the council, and it is an area that I enjoy working with anyway, so I'd be happy to continue to support the work of this committee. But the work that the lead officers that will be working on that will be our property service team, which is under Gary Pentecost. We've got Andrew Lowe, we've got Julia Thompson, and Jessica Shepherd and Nick, and those people, we've built that team now, that we have got a more sort of robust team now to be able to start looking at some of this activity. And so, as I say, we have decided that there are certain areas that we are targeting first, so hopefully, the next time we come to you, we should have an understanding of our garage situation. We should have an understanding of where we are with our current leases and lettings, and whether or not, our rents are up to date and where they are. The areas then, hopefully, we will be looking at is in terms of addressing all of our leases that have been actually captured at that time. So another area where we know we can look to reduce cost is making sure we understand the repairing obligations on some of those lettings, and that we are making sure people are keeping those lettings up to scratch if they're responsible, or where we are making sure that we're dealing with those to keep our assets in good repair and order. So,
all right, in terms of moving forward then, taking garages as an example, I think what we would like to see is some figures on how many have we got, to what extent have we identified those that we really ought to be getting rid of and maybe selling for development or offering for development. It's quite interesting how many kind of rather small patches of land can be used for development, and how many are we going to smarten up, and how many are on tip-top condition. At least that way we can see a degree of financial and time, money, and all the rest of it investment. Yeah. And then ideally the ones that we get rid of and sell with, I don't know, plan of permission or whatever, we can see that can pay for the repairs or the upgrades or whatever of the others. Yeah. And make a bit of income. So that looks like progress. Yeah. So as I say, we can't do everything at once. So what we've done is look at that area, those areas where we can actually start to look to make more money. Yeah. And so, as I say, the garages, the leases and lettings, because those are in our budget, that, as I say, looking at nearly $1 million of new income, then that's why we're targeting those this year. And so I think it would probably be a good idea for us to bring that sort of understanding of how we're trying to deliver that over the next year to you, and where we've got to with that project. And then can we emphasise, how much we really do feel that we really must have a proper register of what we've got? Yes, well that work is ongoing. I think I've given you a timeline as to when we're hoping to get that in place. And as I say, we've been lucky enough to work with Matthew Wallbridge's area in digital to try and look at our needs on that, and hopefully that deadline we'll be able to keep to. But then I think the other piece of work that we can do is around looking at so we've been looking at the libraries, we've been looking at heritage sites, we've been looking at some of our sites where we can look to diversify in terms of what we use them for. And I think a piece of work around what we've been doing to move those kind of assets forward will probably be a good... Yeah, that's a great idea, but we know about those. Yeah. And we don't know about the others. Yeah. All right, thank you so much. That's really helpful, and there's good progress coming along, which is great. Thank you. And we're very keen on it. But as you can tell, we are, we're really keen on this whole project to get it. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to give the cabinet some really punchy recommendations. So that's great. Thank you so much indeed. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you. Oh yes, right, so we've done 5. Cabinet forward plan really to a large extent is for noting, and everyone can note that, and we can come back to thinking about that another day. But there's nothing that leaps out that we need to worry about. Work programme. One very quick thing I wanted to mention that I want us to think about, and then I want you to email me about. And it's to do with council tax, and it's to do with development of properties. It suddenly occurred to me the other day that I haven't got a clue what happens when a property is developed. So from maybe a 1-bed to a 3-bed, 4-bed, whatever. But you do see an awful lot of work going on. And there may be a very simple answer to this. But the real query is, if a property goes from one band to another, to what extent are we chasing that up or finding out about it and making sure that the right properties are being banded in the right way, especially on the basis of development? And it just struck me as being something that might be something interesting that we just find out about. Councillor Gibler.
We can't do that unless they do. This has been coming up over the years, rebanding. Unless they do rebanding of all the properties in the country, we cannot go and individually reband a property, a single property within a area or a zone. The way they did it initially was they banned everything by streets, and at the same time there were other larger properties within the streets, but they say this is street, they're all banned D. So I don't think that is something we have got the power to do so, actually. So I would suggest somebody to look into it and see if the criteria is still the same as what it was when it got published. It's been coming up many times that they should be rebanding, but that's got to be done nationally.
Councillor Banerjee.
Sorry,
Well, I think it's worth us just trying to find out, because it's quite an interesting little area. It was raised with me by somebody about the fact that there is so much, there is so much development going on as to whether or not we're losing out. I think maybe we are, but maybe we have to. Okay, Councillor Banerjee.
It's been coming up quite a lot. I've heard it so many times on the news.
Thank you, Chair. Just two small things, actually. On the Cabinet Forward Plan, I noticed it seems to be like, flavour of the month, 2 garage disposals. I appreciate that we're sort of working on this in real time. I just want to know, has that gone through that sort of, economic viability process, or have we missed the boat on that? So, I think one was Black Horse Yard and the other one was... Well, anyway, that's a question I'd like to ask. And secondly, if I may, I think in the works programme we have site visits planned over summer. If those dates can be firmed up at some point, it'd be good, because we're already into June. And I think some of us can go on summer holidays soon, and it'd be good if a couple of us get at least 10 days. So the further in advance we get a heads up on those dates would be great. Thank you.
Nope, that's a good point. Councillor Bennett.
So I suppose this is probably the right point to mention it. So we kind of covered it off earlier that there isn't a financial update. So we last met 9 weeks ago, where we went through training, for want of a better term, on how to read everything, how to work out the savings. This is the select committee that is accountable for finance and a variety of other things. And so to wait 9 weeks to the next meeting and to not have any update from finance on all the different directorates that we have oversight of as to where they are with those savings, particularly at a time when the leader of the council is reported in the media of having said we're behind, I think it's poor, and not wanting to call out individuals. I think it shows a lack of respect for this committee and the scrutiny that we are obliged to take. Everyone who is at the top is always very quick to point out that select committees are really important, and they are, but they're really important if we get the right things here. And when we didn't have a meeting in May, and the last time we met was 9 weeks ago, the Finance Select Committee, with the way our finances are, should be reviewing savings to target and having the right officers here to challenge as to why we might be behind. That's my piece and rant over with. Chair.
No,
Thank you.
it's a good rant and it's a good piece and it's something that I've been working on. And I mentioned it right at the beginning as well. So we said at the last meeting where we had all the finance people that we wanted regular updates so that we can do budget monitoring and to see set against that initial set of figures that we had, which was quite useful. And we said we want to be able to see how we're doing on that, and we haven't had it. So it's been looked into, and it's quite interesting, if you like, the some of the responses that we've had. So we'll look into it further.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. Good. All right. Unless anybody's... Councillor Chibnall.
I want to make a proposition. Our next meeting is on 23rd next month, July. Is it possible to bring it forward?
For what purpose?
Because I will not be able to make it.
Oh, I see. Look, if anyone's got any difficulty over dates, I think the best thing to do is to send them to you, and then we can see what we can do to accommodate people. I mean, that's always the case in a sense, you know. Whenever we know the published dates the dates are published quite a long time in advance. But if there are particular meetings that members want to get to and can't, and everybody else agrees, then we'll have a look.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I thought I'd raise it now rather than just say, well, look, I cannot make it.
Okay, but we'll see if we can. We'll see if we can accommodate. All right. Thank you, everybody. Close the meeting.